If you're like a lot of people out there, you may be thinking about dropping ChatGPT right now. You might be really dissatisfied with that ChatGPT 5 rollout, but I want to encourage you to hang on. And I want to tell you why dropping ChatGPT is probably not the answer. So, first of all, ChatGPT is a large language model, just like Gemini, just like Claude, just like some of the other models out there. I know that they have their differences. They're trained differently. There are things that give them different distinctions and strengths in various areas. But the underlying system architecture, the way they're made, is the same. And so I want to explain a little bit more to you about that today because I think that's going to help you understand your frustrations with ChatGPT and perhaps with some other large language models that you might be using. Although ChatGPT is one of the biggest offenders just because of the way their developer priorities mesh with that system architecture. Okay, so first of all, I think there's this big disconnect between most of us, how we think that AI works and how it actually works, right? Because I've seen so many comments in so many groups about, this is ridiculous. It should understand this. This is logical and it's not understanding it. It's not giving me what I've asked for. It comes up with all these ridiculous things that don't make sense. Well, here's the thing. It doesn't operate based off of logic, based off of computer logic or human logic for that matter. They do call it artificial intelligence because it is artificial. It's a simulation of human intellect, but it doesn't work in that way at all. So, first of all, we feel like it's understanding, it gets us, it remembers things, that it's thinking, but that's not actually what it's doing. So, it's actually just predicting and recognizing patterns at scale. It takes all of our words, it turns those words into tokens, and then it looks at these token patterns. So it uses a transformer, what's called a transformer model, to do this. Transformer model architecture is what underlies all LLMs. And so basically, it's a system that lets AI process language by looking at every word in the sequence. And again, that's broken into tokens. So every token in the sequence, all at the same time. Whereas we would read a sentence from left to right, the AI is seeing the entire sequence all at one time and processing it all at one time. And it uses a mechanism called attention, which makes sense, right? And all this means is that it's trained to say, hey, what part of this input should I focus on the most? Like, what is important here? And so it can seem like it really gets us and it seems super smart because it's just really, really good at spotting the relationships between tokens, between words, because of statistical probability. So, using attention, this mechanism of attention, instead of sequential memory, is the only thing that really has made AI as we know it possible. But it also has created a new problem because we've got that disconnect. We've got that gap of understanding between what it looks like it's doing, what it feels like it's doing, and what it's actually doing, because that impacts how we use it. That impacts how we interact with it. And so really like the best metaphor that I can think of for this is like, let's say that you were, back in school and you're working on a paper and you go to the library to do research. Now, okay, it's old school. Maybe some of you have always done everything online, but essentially, even when you're looking online, you're pulling up these sources. You're not necessarily reading every word. If you've ever been a graduate student, you know that one of the things they teach you is that you've got to get really good at skimming, because you've got to be able to take a source and look at it and skim through sometimes an entire book to find the chunks of it that are relevant to your research, to your topic for that paper. And that's kind of what your LLM is doing as well. That's what ChatGPT is doing. So it's skimming, it's like highlighting what seems important, jotting down notes, and then when we look for a response, it's going to pull what it thinks matters, right? Have you ever written a paper and been off base and maybe not gotten the best grade because what you thought mattered was not necessarily as relevant to the topic, or, maybe the source wasn't as credible, that kind of thing. And so anyway, it's pattern-based prioritization. Now, here's where that analogy fails, right? Because we as humans, as we're skimming and we are reading and we are highlighting, we have human judgment and we have human discernment and we have our human experience and a certain degree of wisdom that helps us to identify what matters and what's relevant. And AI doesn't have that. It has statistical probability. It's basing everything on the patterns, but without that human discernment, without that human language, right? So this is where something called semantic salience comes in. And that is where it's figuring out, okay, what out of this sequential input do I keep? What do I ignore? What matters here to this user? How do I produce what this user wants? Okay. And so basically, it's the way the model decides to weight. You've heard me talk about different weighting shifts, and there have been a lot of weighting shifts that have rolled out with ChatGPT 5. They've changed the weighting and the prioritization. Okay. So the semantic salience, which is again how the AI decides what's important and what's not, it's not meaning based for us, like we just talked about in that research analogy. We would know, we would be able to go in and we would know, okay, what makes sense here? We can tell based on our wisdom and based on our applied knowledge of a particular topic. The only thing AI has to go on is the statistical probability. That's it. That's all it can base it on. And so it works really, really well. But when there are things that come into play, like nuance or instruction order, or contradiction, conflation, these things throw a wrench in the works. And this is where we get drifting. And this is where we get hallucinations. And this is where we get bad outputs. So we really have to learn what the weaknesses are, what the limitations are of these AI transformer models, these LLMs, in order to work well with them. Okay, so now comes something called key value compression. And key value compression is how it shrinks what it remembers. Now, AI doesn't remember like a computer does. It's not about retrieving very specific information that was saved specifically. Remember, this is not a logic-based system in any way, shape, or form. And so basically, the memory of an LLM, any LLM, functions like a wall of sticky notes. And so every time there's something important and ChatGPT is saying that it's updated memory, it's basically throwing the sticky note up on the wall. Now, anytime you write a new prompt, you start a new chat session, the things that it has updated in its memory, this wall of sticky notes, it still has to analyze your prompt, the tokens that you've given it, the sequence of tokens that you've given it against all of those sticky notes on the wall and determine, oh, okay, hey, this looks relevant, that looks relevant. Let me pull these sticky notes into this conversation. So if it's not recognizing through statistical pattern probability that there's relevance, it's still going to miss some things. Again, this is not like computer memory or computer logic, but most of us have that idea, the way of that working so ingrained that we think it is. And that's why we get super frustrated when it's not bringing back everything that we feel like it should. So some of these things get dropped. Some of them, sometimes when it's doing these key value compressions, sometimes something important will get saved and retrieved, but it's pulled out of its original context. And so the pattern even around it is not there. Okay, so in order for AI to keep working, and you know, we all want these larger context windows. You hear about context windows and how we've enlarged the context window with this update, or this LLM has a context window of 1,000,000 tokens instead of 126,000 tokens, and it sounds so much better. And depending on how they're handling that semantic salience, how they're handling that KV compression, what they've given priority to in their weighting, yeah, sometimes it might be better for certain things. But the truth of the matter is that in any LLM, anytime you enlarge a context window, the larger that context window gets, the more sequences there are, the more it has to compress, the more margin for error there is. You actually increase your danger for drifting away from instruction, drifting away from original purpose, drifting away from original intent, the larger that context window gets. So how do they make all of this work? It's something called approximate attention. So it's not the same thing as full attention. And it just uses shortcuts to decide what to move forward with. It doesn't fully read it. It doesn't fully remember. Everything is about what it recognizes as patterns, and it skims. Maybe it would be like skimming even faster, right? Skimming even faster, looking at words that stand out for the pattern, if this was continuing in the research analogy, right? And so this is why your prompts are sometimes getting parts of them are getting ignored halfway through. It's going to sometimes flip back to different behavior. It sounds like you have to repeat yourself to stay on track, which you do. And it's really an important part of learning how to understanding how to work well with AI and collaborate well with ChatGPT is the fact that you do have to be redundant, especially after this GPT-5 rollout, because it has more of a recency bias. What does that mean? Recency bias means that what you have just given it, that sequence of tokens you've just given it, matters more than an instruction that you gave it several prompts back. And even in custom GPTs, when we're working with custom GPTs, that's a set of system instructions that is supposed to go in and be taken into account for every single interaction that we have, within that GPT. But you're getting further away from it, even within the system blocks, because when GPT-5 launched, some of my custom GPTs were not working as they should have. And the thing that broke it is this recency bias. There needed to be more embedded redundancy, more anchoring. So whereas previously I could give it an instruction at the beginning, like assign it a specialized role, this custom GPT, and it would remember it through the rest of the system instructions, this was no longer happening in GPT-5 because of the increased recency bias and the increased helpfulness bias. Because they've given it an increased helpfulness bias, it wants to think of it as like a people pleaser that will do anything to please you. So these are some of the initial issues. Now, I know they're already rolling out changes. It's been out for over 3 weeks now. There's a lot that is going on, but I'm finding that a lot of this is still the case, especially with the having to embed anchors or embed redundancy in custom GP instructions. So basically, with every system block, every little instruction block within your system instructions, you would have to re-anchor that role to make sure that that custom GPT stays within its role. You would have to be much, much stronger with the language. For example, in the previous model, you could say, avoid this, don't do this. Now you have to use things like never do this, always do this. You have to use much stronger language to keep certain guardrails in place. And you kind of have to do the same thing with your prompting, right? Because custom GPTs are just very specific. It's very specific prompting instructions on how to interact every time somebody's coming into this custom wrapper of the GPT. So we have to repeat ourselves a lot to keep it from drifting. We have to anchor it. We have to use strong language. And it's kind of frustrating to have to be that repetitive. But if you understand why it's happening, you understand what's going on, and you just kind of embed that into the way you work with it. These were things that I having already known and understand the way the LLMs work under the hood, it wasn't as frustrating for me, I don't think, because I kind of expected it with larger context windows. I sort of thought this was probably going to happen. And so I was kind of prepared for it. Now, all that said, why am I saying don't ditch ChatGPT 5? Because they did give us the ability to use legacy models, right? But even just this week, in some groups, in Jonathan Mast's group, for example, one of my favorite voices in this space, in his group, he has mentioned that they are experiencing the fact that a lot of the GPTs, even though you had the ability to change back to legacy, that they're only working in 5. Right. And so I think that in terms of technological advance, I think it's reasonable and realistic that we need to understand, even if initially a knee-jerk reaction to keep people happy is that they have allowed these legacy models to be used in this way, that's not going to continue forever. That was a temporary fix for them while they tried to really adjust the things that were really bothering people about GPT-5, right? And I think another thing about this that we have to remember is, like, not only is there a disconnect that we have in not understanding how these LLMs work under the hood necessarily, there's a disconnect between us and the tech companies if you are in the digital entrepreneur space, because We need to set things in motion and know that they're going to work. We need to know that they're going to be stable, that they're going to be predictable. And that's what we rely on. That's what we're looking for. That is not necessarily what the tech companies see as progress. To them, having better scores on the reasoning models, having all of this performance-based metrics that don't equate to the performance-based metrics that we would use in business to run a small business, to use as entrepreneurs, there's just a gap. There's a disconnect. And we have to remember that these are amazing tools, but not only should we never remove a human from the loop, like there always needs to be a human in oversight there, we also need to understand that they are not necessarily catering to us. There's been a lot of talk about the fact that GPT-5 was really more about catering to the enterprise users and the enterprise level of business, which is a little bit different than the solopreneur or the digital entrepreneur or even the digital marketing space, right? There's a lot, there's a lot more of a curve, a lot more of an adoption barrier with them, because you're talking about massive numbers of people needing to be trained in it. And so they just kind of have different objectives, and whatever they needed to do to have things work better for enterprises is going to make more sense for them business wise, just like we would make our decisions based on what's going to be best for our business. So these are just all things that, we really need to keep in mind. And I think that learning how they work, learning how these LLMs work, helps us to work better with them, collaborate better with them, and have better and more stable outcomes, even as new model releases come out, even as things continue to advance. So I hope that this has been helpful to you today. I hope you've learned something. I hope maybe this can help ease some of your frustrations with ChatGPT 5. But if not, I do hope you'll keep coming back to the channel. Hit that subscribe button, because I'll be continuing to talk about all of the AI literacy things and how it impacts your business, as well as where that converges with compliance, with risk conversations, with all the things that matter to building stable systems that help build trust with your clients and grow with your business in a super stable way. Thanks so much.